be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, let me say from the outset, despite the comments early on of Mr Brownlee, that we in this House, I suspect there's not one member of Parliament in the House that doesn't want to get this right. We all want to get this right. We all want as fast a pace of recovery as humanly possible. No one in putting up amendments, whether they be the political party of which I'm a part of or submitters yesterday, has put up amendments with the motivation to slow things down for our community. Mr Brownlee has an obsession with the framework which is, I think the words he used, pace versus taking time. And I think Mr Brownlee's definition of framework of that is that if we don't do it his way, the people of Canterbury will be delayed. And I agree with him when he says that people sitting in their houses are digging their lives out of their back lawn without a chemical toilet, without the basic provisions of life, having been dislocated from their basic routines, having lost their jobs, their homes, their livelihoods, and tragically, family members and or friends. The one thing they want is, to use the phrase that Mr Brownlee, I think, has made a brand of, they want us to get on with it. And I agree with Mr Brownlee in that respect. But the other thing the people of Canterbury want is they do not want this legislation and the authority that's already in place through Order in Council. So really you could argue this is sort of rubber stamping what Mr Brownlee wants, because he's already told us all he's got the numbers. But what the people of Canterbury want is they want us to get this right. Because if we don't get this legislation right and the authority that flows from it stuffs it up, who will be the loser? I doubt whether it will be many people on either side of this House sitting here with jobs, with houses, although I acknowledge colleagues on both sides have got some munted properties, but we can survive because we have a thing called income, and we have means, and we have mobility, and we have other resources. The big losers will not be Mr Brownlee, although maybe in a political sense. The big losers will be the people of Canterbury. And I just put this to Mr Brownlee, that on many occasions through this process, he has broken many commitments he has given to us in order for us to act in a non-partisan way. And I say that not out of self-interest. I say that we have come to the table before this legislation was put up. Well, see, there he goes, you see. He just says there's no politics in this. There's no politics in this, he says. And that's a telling comment from Mr Brownlee, and I'll tell you why, Mr Speaker. Because Mr Brownlee has defined playing politics, and as anybody who disagrees puts up an alternative idea, Mr Brownlee labels them as playing politics. Any member of the community who says maybe there is a better way, or can we be helpful, or maybe Mr Brownlee should do his job slightly better, he labels them as either impeding progress or playing politics. Well, shame on that member. Shame on that member. And I say that the people of Canterbury want to get this right. And here's the risk, sir. Here's the risk. Here's the risk. We have had commitments to have, at the start of the formation of the authority, Mr Brownlee said, I want to ask to see me privately. He wrote on a piece of paper, and I still have it, a short schematic of his embryonic thoughts in respect of the authority. And he said that he wanted the Labor Party and the communities we represent, actually, because it's not about us and what we think, it's about the feedback we get from our communities and our constituents. That's why we are entitled to the Queen's shilling, that is our wages. He said, looked me in the eye and said, we want you on board. This is real consultation, this is non-partisanship. So we agreed. And we asked two things. We asked for input and we asked for advice papers. And he agreed to it. And he set up two meetings with Mr Gough and myself, and he cancelled both. We rang Wayne Eagleson, the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, the week the legislation was going through Cabinet Committee. We were told, no Cabinet Committee, they're not dealing with it. Not at all. We got a phone call on the Friday of that week, sir, to be told by Mr Brownlee that it was a fait accompli. Now, I don't know about playing politics, and I used a word, sir, about 3 times in respect of Mr Brownlee at that meeting, which I will not use here, but I'm sure it could be couched in the definition of breaking one's commitments, or word. And that is the nature of the process. Then we bounce forward, sir, to the Select Committee. 4 hours and 40 minutes submitters had to provide evidence to this committee. 4 hours and 40 minutes. Most of the submitters had not been consulted at all before they received the bill via the internet, which they plucked off the parliamentary website after I asked the clerk if they would put it on because the minister hadn't provided it. 4 hours and 40 minutes. They had less than 24 hours, sir, 24 hours to prepare submissions. The Law Society, which as you would know, sir, is asked very regularly, if not all the time in respect of legislation, to participate in the process, to actively submit in the process, appeared before us. They got the bill at 4 o'clock the day before. They had less than 24 hours to put a submission in. The Legislative Advisory Committee, the government's own agency made up of eminent legal minds, got the bill for the first time, they told the Select Committee, at around the same time as it was laid on the table of this House. Now, the people of Canterbury are going to go, well, so what? As Mr Brownlee says, we want our lives back. What are you guys worried about all the technical detail? Get on with it. But here's the problem I come back to again. Mr Brownlee has shown scant regard to listen to experts and expert evidence and to give people one extra day perhaps. The only reason we had a Select Committee was the Thursday before Labor members in a meeting with Mr Brownlee demanded one. And we also said to Mr Brownlee, if you're going to agree to it, could you please flag it tomorrow, that is the Friday before this week, so submitters would actually have the weekend to put their arguments together and to do a robust job. Well, he messed about, and then he announced it less than 24 hours before. Councils were late to the meeting because they'd only been told about it the night before. The City Council was given a bill. They were a week before the Select Committee a draft, 6.4. The City Council solicitor was given it and told you are not allowed to show it to any City Councillor. So we had this farce of the Deputy Mayor turning up giving a submission and having to admit through the City Council solicitor that no one on the council had even seen the bill because the government had told them they weren't allowed to be shown the bill. Now I say, well, Mr Brownlee calls the solicitor of the City Council a liar. That's what he calls. He said it's rubbish. So I asked Mr Brownlee to say that outside the House and allow the City Council solicitor to action that. But moving on, sir, the point I make is this. We want to get this right. But Mr Brownlee holds a view that he holds a monopoly on all knowledge on this. And OK, they've got the numbers, we're adults, we accept it. But here's the point I say to Mr Brownlee. He holds the pen as the earthquake czar. He declines to agree with me when he says he has wartime powers. Well, let me say to Mr Brownlee that if you look at the history of it, he and his government only have to return to this House to seek the permission of this House to amend a very small number of acts. He can do basically what he likes, and as Philip Joseph said, Clause 73.2 is an ouster clause, which means Mr Brownlee cannot be challenged, or any of his ministers, by any court in the land for a decision they make in respect of this earthquake. So I say this to Mr Brownlee. He has chosen his course of action. He has shown throughout this that he would not listen to the business community of Christchurch. That's why they mounted the barricades and took up placards. I've never seen that in Christchurch. He has taken the view that he will not listen to opposition members and broke nearly every commitment he made for a bipartisan approach. He made it privately. He never made it publicly. And he knows he broke it. And I've never seen a politician sit across a table from me and say they'll do one thing and blatantly break that commitment some days later. Normally certain politicians of that ilk use more diplomatic and surreptitious means to lie, sir, but I won't use that word in respect of Mr Brownlee. But I say this. Mr Brownlee said it's my way or the highway. And I say, Mr Brownlee, the people of Canterbury will support this legislation. The people of Canterbury will wait, and the acid test of this legislation and that man's stewardship over there, and John Key, who promised, and I quote, that no one in Canterbury will be worse off, the acid test will be whether this legislation fails. Now, we have a paper trail a mile long of the assistance that we tried to render privately and publicly. Privately and publicly. We have a paper trail a mile long of the assistance that members of the public and eminent organisations attempted to render privately and publicly. And we will know when the amendments come up, which Mr Brownlee is going to furnish to us as usual, minutes, he said to me 11 o'clock, minutes before this debate concludes and the committee stage begins. The people of Canterbury will judge if this fails, and we will make it work. We will try and make it work, and we will work with Mr Brownlee regardless of the concerns we have. Because our concern, I will say, like his, is to make this thing work. But if it comes a gutser, I say to Mr Brownlee, it is visited on his head, his Canterbury colleagues' head, The Prime Minister and his government's head and their heads alone, sir. And the people of Canterbury will judge that. We want to get it right, but we'd like to get it right first time, not second time.